Hello, BookTube. Well, it's been a while again. In fact, I think I should make that my new intro. I should just film this. It's been a while. School's taken up some time. But I'm here. Anyway, I don't want to be a stuck record because, as I said, this is already becoming a stuck record. And I would like to get on with this video and actually talk about the books that I read in January. I'm hoping it's still early February. No, it's not. It's mid-February. It's Valentine's week. Anyway, moving on. So, the first thing that I read over the holidays was this. 3 were a reread, and this is a lot of my reading. So, it's a fantasy series, 5-part fantasy series by Brent Weeks, and the first book is The Black Prism, which was a reread. I think I read it 2016. Interesting, fascinating, curious. Book 2, The Blinding Knife. Wow, the story continued. Epic. Book 3, The Broken Eye. Oh, where's it gonna get to? This is amazing. Book 4, Shit. Double shit. But that sounds mean, so let me talk about it. So, let's hope I can put my arm here without shaking everything. So, this series had so much potential. Brent Weeks, I would have considered the idea that he and Brandon Sanderson came from a similar mind pool. So instead of having your traditional fantasy characters where you had your mage, your assassin, your warrior, your dwarves, your elves, and Gandalf, you had, and a dragon, you had something different. So like Mistborn was different. It worked with ingestion of metals, and that was an interesting idea. It was completely new, and it made it fun. And in Brent Weeks' Night Angel series, I found that some things were original, and then because I enjoyed that series of his, I then picked up this one. This is the Lightbringer series, and the first 3 books were amazing because amazing is a loose term here. So, but just go along with this. He's got a really interesting magic system. It works on color, and people who can create colors, well, it's not so much create color, but they can use color. All right, so you need to be able to be seeing red, and you can do stuff because then you can manipulate the color. And then it had side effects as well, which is also nice in a world because you don't want everything to be fantastic. You know, there've got to be side effects. And so red, for example, was fire and passion. So people who used red a lot tended to suffer from anger issues. And, you know, blue was cold and logical. And some colors you could build with and some you couldn't. And basically, you see what happens is that once you have used too much of your color, you break the halo, which is shown in the eyes. The color bursts through the iris into the eye, I'm assuming, and you go nuts. And you see, the way that they fix this problem is also interesting because they kill you. So it's a permanent solution. It definitely works, 100% effectiveness, but possibly socially disturbing. Although this is part of the culture of the world, people have grown up with this, so that, you know, this is the way things work. But obviously, once you have broken your halo, you don't really necessarily want to go willingly, as one might understand. But there are a group of people out there who have broken the halo, and they have done something to become godlike. And that was how the story in the first 3 books was heading. And I thought that was fabulous. Because obviously, well, it wasn't just obviously, because in the book it is written that they are coming to them. And then on top of it, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. There's a guy who is trying to take over parts of the world. There's a whole lot of political intrigue. You have the Prism, who's the guy who's magically in charge, although, you know, there's questions about that. And then there's also the White, who's also kind of magically in charge, and it's involved. And I was really getting into the story. I was thoroughly enjoying it. There were things that I didn't appreciate, which even back in 2016 when I read it for the first time, I didn't really appreciate, because I actually mentioned it in my review, where I said that Brent Weeks has the ability to be horribly immature. So he'll have characters say and do things that would be completely out of line for their station. So you don't have a servant comment on, oh my God, and this actually did happen. So there's a marriage and whatnot, and they haven't consummated the marriage, not that anybody knows. And the maid actually, or the servant, actually says to him that he needs to clean around his foreskin. I mean, let's be honest, your best friend wouldn't say that to you. I doubt your father would say that to you when you're old enough to get married, maybe when you were 5. But, you know, so there are things like that, which is just, you know, it's never going to happen, and it's absolute nonsense, and I don't even know why it got past an editor. I can understand why somebody might want to write shit like that. I don't know why, actually, why somebody would want to write shit like that. I take that back. I don't know why you'd want to do that. But anyway, so that was one of the things. You know, there was this constant level of unbelievability. I mean, you would never, if I had a servant who said shit like that, I don't have a servant, but if I did, if I had a peer say shit like that to me, I would go and complain that they were out of line. If it was my freaking servant, they'd be fired. I'm sorry, but there's a line, and that's called crossing it. And then there's other things that he did, like he would have fart jokes. I mean, for pity's sakes, fart jokes. We are not 5, you know, or teenage boys. Apologies to the male gender, but, you know, I've never heard a girl give a fart joke. Okay, maybe one. But, you know, the exception proves the rule. And so, you know, there were so many things that were so immature and so much that was unnecessary. And a little part of me feels that he kind of watched Game of Thrones and that he felt that he needed to have a little bit more maturity in his story, and so he tweaked things that he wouldn't normally have done, and he changed things, and it didn't work for me. Like he ended up including, I don't want to say weird sex because it's not 50 Shades of Grey, but okay, let me explain this, because he's got it in the author's note. I mean, of all things, author's note, hang fire, author's note, there we go, author's note. I can't believe I'm saying this on YouTube. Vaginismus, as suffered by Tisis malagus, is a real gynecological condition that can cause painful intercourse or the inability to experience intercourse, as all due to involuntary muscle spasm. It is also little understood and too often surrounded by shame, jokes, or disbelief. One woman I know confessed to her female gynecologist that she had been unable to consummate her marriage. The doctor told her it was her own fault for being a virgin. Well, that's a first. And it would have been a problem, and it wouldn't have been a problem if she'd been sexually active earlier, and offered no treatment suggestions other than maybe get really drunk. So, okay, so genuine issue. I can't say I know anybody who suffers from this, but if it's a genuine condition and it's worthy of attention, which obviously he feels it is, then do it where it doesn't come across as just like something that was added on. It's the decoration on a cake that shouldn't have been there, if that makes sense. It just was weird. Because here you got Kip and Tisis trying to, and it was just as uncomfortable to read as it probably was for her to try and experience. And I kind of felt that if Brent Weeks really has this idea that he would like to, you know, deal with and make public and, you know, do his thing for Vaginismus, then go write a drama. You know, it would be very interesting to actually see a male take on this. It would be very interesting. But anyway, so moving on. So there was things like that, and then the complete and utter lack of logic with characters doing things that they would never have done. I mean, you wouldn't concede power to Lucius Malfoy, you know, so don't do it to the worst character from this book. And then the other thing is that I really feel that he changed his mind as to where the story was going after the 3rd book. So the 3rd book, we were heading along, as I said, I gave you a brief synopsis, and it's difficult to give a synopsis because the story goes somewhere else after the 3rd book. And, you know, things that had happened in the first 2 books suddenly didn't happen. So in the first 2 books, you're with a character who's in a dungeon and he's trying to escape, and he breaks out of the one and he ends up in another cell, and etc., etc., and then this didn't happen. So how did it not happen? Don't tell me it's a hallucination. That's BS. That's just a cheap pull. He changed his mind, and I was annoyed, actually. I didn't enjoy it. I would have much appreciated an author's note that said, please eliminate chapters 1, 6, 7, 9, 15, 32, and 45 or something like that. You know, just so that because it felt cheap. You know, if you'd already written it and he changed his mind, well, you know, you've written it, it's been published, you've got a job to do. It's called fulfillment, and I felt that it was multiple cheap blows. So while there were elements of Brent Weeks' writing that I really appreciated in the first 3 books, besides immaturity, he was really good at keeping the pacing up. These were what I considered fun reads, you know. The pacing was good and quick, and he could write a battle scene, and he could write a battle scene. I mean, in the Night Angel trilogy, I think there was multiple chapters that was one battle, and there was no point where I was confused or bored, and it was exciting and gripping, and it was just what I wanted. And I was hoping for something like this because it looked like we were building up to a battle that just, yeah. And so, look, I could really, my mum and I, we read these together, and she and I spent days actually just tearing them apart. So I'm being very brief, and I'm really restraining myself because there's so many things I'd love to tell you about how many reasons why this book, well, series let me down. Because it could have, I think what hurts the most is that it had so much potential. As I said, it was an amazing magic system, and it was a really cool world, and then it just went splat. Anyway, so we're moving on. So the next one I read was just as weird in a way. So this is How to Build a Girl by Caitlin Moran, which when I picked up I thought was non-fiction, and then I discovered very, very early on was not. In fact, the first line in the author's note on this one says this is a work of fiction. And I was like, okay, so I need to now move it from my shelves, and that means rearranging stuff. But it will happen at some point because I'm bound to buy more books. Anyway, so this was also a very unusual book for me. It's not up my aisle per se. If I really wanted to read this much sex, I would go buy an erotic novel. And I know this had a different message behind it. But being a teacher, I felt that this should have been called How to Break a Girl. So the character in this, whose name I can't remember, decides that she is going to reinvent herself. She is publicly humiliated as a result of a television show that she won a poetry prize on. And she ended up as a chubby teenage girl reenacting, I think it was Scooby-Doo. And of course, every kid at school saw this, and so it was a big joke. And she decided she was going to reinvent herself. And she ends up dropping out of school and writing for some, I think it was a music magazine. I could be lying here. And she decides that to reinvent herself, she is going to become very easy to sleep with. She's going to drink a lot, take up smoking, and at some point she even dabbles in drugs. And I did not really consider that an uplifting experience. While I was reading this, as an adult, I was thinking, you silly, silly girl, these men are just using you. And by men, anybody from up until the age of 40, I think she shagged. And look, I'm all for the idea of, you know, what's good for the gander is good for the goose. If a guy can go and shag a girl and not get slut-shamed for it, well, you know, vice versa. We do need to have sexual freedom. I get that. But, you know, it's hard to read it and not be critical. So I know it said laugh out loud funny, and I didn't find it that way, because I know too many girls who've done this and been hurt and injured and emotionally scarred, etc. And I just, it's not the message per se, because it's not like Caitlin Moran is promoting this lifestyle. This is a fictional story of what this character tried to do, and she realizes at the end just how much it hasn't worked. But it wasn't my favorite read. It was, I mean, okay, look, I can't believe I'm going to read this on YouTube, public platform. But I mean, this is how it opens. Okay, I'm laying in bed next to my brother Lupin. He is 6 years old. He is asleep. I am 14. I'm not asleep. I am masturbating. Not quite my read. But I finished it. It was not in my comfort zone, and so be it. I did it. Oh, okay. We will be right. Moving on. So the next book, not the last book, there's still some more to go, is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, and this one I thoroughly enjoyed. So this is an epistolary novel set just after World War II, where you've got the people in England who are recovering after all the bombing and whatnot. And our heroine, whose name I think is Juliet Ashton, because I've just seen it on the back, I can't remember. She was quite popular as a writer during the war in a paper, and they've now collected all of her columns together and they've published them as a book. And she's now looking for something else to do, something that is different, and inadvertently, somehow or another, she ends up getting in contact with the people on Guernsey. Well, they contact her and about their book club that they formed during the German occupation of Guernsey. And it ends up being a little bit of a love story and a little bit of a true, well, not quite a true life, but a bit of a genuine reflection. Although I don't think anybody can say that the horrors revealed in this were anything like the horrors that actually existed. It just gives you a little touch and taste of some of what had happened during the war to prisoners of war, etc. And I think it feels a little bit more shocking than it really is, because you have so much nice, cute, sweet stuff followed by little, and you're hoping, because this isn't a war novel per se, that it's going to have an everybody's happy ending, which it's I'm not going to say. And so I quite enjoyed it. It was just the end that was a little bit of a letdown, because, as I said, the entire book is told in letters between people, and then the last part is a rather childish detective note by one of the citizens on the island, where what you'd been hoping for to happen finally happens, and it just felt a bit juvenile, actually, in comparison to everything else that had happened. So I really enjoyed it. I think it was my favorite read of January, but I would have just preferred a little slightly different presentation at the end. The next book is Vinegar Girl by Anne Tyler, and this one is one of the books in the Hogarth series, and this one is based on William Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew, and that alone should tell one that this is quite the feat, because The Taming of the Shrew, even though it's set as a comedy, is probably not going to be an easy one to swallow in today's day and age. I mean, you can't take your female character, force her to marry a guy, pretty much, and then have him break her to the point that he can point at the sun and say, it's the moon, and she can go, yeah, it's the moon. Where she could think for herself and act for herself and all that beforehand. And although I'm hoping that it was originally cast as a comedy and that it was all very tongue-in-cheek, my inner little feminist was having a temper tantrum while I was reading the original, so I didn't quite know what Anne Tyler was going to do with this. And then, of course, that little voice in the back of my head also said, why bother? They made 10 Things I Hate About You with the gorgeous, stunning Heath Ledger back in the day in Julia Stiles, and they turned that into a beautiful, brilliant feminist piece for young adults. And who can better that? I mean, this doesn't have Heath Ledger, so yeah, but Anne Tyler actually did a decent job. The beginning took me a while to get into, I will be honest. I found Kat a little difficult to relate to. It's not so much relate to, but just to kind of understand. She was just cold and grumpy and a bit brash, and she had no idea what diplomacy is or tact. And let's be honest, most people actually do have some knowledge on tact and diplomacy, because if you don't have that, you're Gregory House, and people kind of spoon you. So I found that a little bit difficult to swallow in the beginning, although I suppose if I was my dad's maid and looking after my little sister, I might also become a bit mean. I don't have a little sister. Maybe it would be pleasant. But anyway, and then it also was a little hard to swallow when Dad wanted to marry her off to his lab assistant, because Dad was working on some research or cure for an autoimmune disease or something along the lines. And yeah, Piotr in his lab was, his green card was almost up. So, you know, that side of it was, but I actually found myself enjoying it, and I know that for a fact because the pages were moving. And it sounds like I've given you a lot, but to be totally honest, I think you find all of that out by chapter 2, and there's quite a few more chapters in this. But you end up getting to enjoy Kat and, you know, Piotr you see differently, and Dad, yeah. Her sister, I think, was the only character that was so super cliched. She was so ditzy, it just wasn't funny. But anyway. And then we're getting to technically the second last book. So this is Rachel's Blue by Zakes. And Zakes is a South African writer, and he is most renowned for The Madonna of Excelsior, I think, which I read last year and thoroughly enjoyed. So I saw his name and I just picked up the book, and I had no idea what this was about, because I think if I did, I might have just left it where I found it and not bought it. Because this was not the easiest read. I think it was a very good read. I think it was quite well done, but it was not an easy book to read. So a bit of a synopsis here. So for one, this is set in America, and that made it a little difficult for me actually, because the first character that you follow is Jason de Klerk, and that is such a South African surname that every time they mentioned the de Klerks, I was back in South Africa, and then the story didn't fit. And Rachel and her grandmother lived in a township, and a township in South Africa is basically informal housing, or informal housing that has now been developed into RDP housing, which is, you know, basically the size of a matchbox, you know, one room houses, etc. So I don't know, I'd actually, if somebody here could shed some light on what what a township is in America, particularly Ohio, I would be very, very curious to know. But anyway, I'm going to put this down. So in this story, Zakes deals with two very difficult themes. At this point, if you don't like spoilers, I suggest you toodles, and we'll chat again later. Anyway, so the first one he deals with is rape. And the second one is as a result of that, because apparently in all but 6 states in America at the time of this being written, the father of a rape child, in other words, the rapist, had the same paternal rights over his child as any normal father would. And so that is what is explored in the story. And he does this really well, because he looks at, you first enter the story with Jason, and he of course becomes the rapist. And he meets Rachel, and they didn't have a thing per se when they were at school, but they had gone out a few times. It could have been termed dating, but they didn't have any sexual relation or anything of the sort. He is very upset that she's involved with another guy, and that's what he chooses to do. And then the second theme kicks in, and it becomes a very difficult read, because it infuriated me throughout this book that these people could have the audacity to then want to ruin her again. You know, it's like, haven't they done enough? But anyway, so I think it's an important book to read. It was definitely enlightening. I want to go and find out what the law is in South Africa on this, because I don't know. I have a funny feeling it's not the same, because we do not have the same restrictions on women and their bodies as America does at the moment. So I'm assuming that as well, actually I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? I have no idea. I'm assuming that they would stick the guy in jail, you know. But anyway, so there was that, and I thought it was brilliant. It was just not the nicest read I've ever had. And then the last book I read, I don't have it here, it's sitting on my desk at school. I bought it for the kids that I was teaching to read, and it was a little bit too advanced for them, but I've got other kids that are quite advanced, and then they're sitting reading it when they catch up, well, when they're finished with work. And anyway, and that was Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. And that one I don't want to go too much into detail with, because who knows how the copper regulations work, and it is a child's book. So I'm just going to say that I thought it was exciting and interesting, and it was a survival story, and I can see why it is popular. Yeah, I mean, it was your typical survival story, you know, all about courage and gumption and thinking clearly and the strength of the human spirit. We'll go with that, and we're just going to leave it there, because I don't know how kiddie things work, and I am not paying any bloody fine for having children's content. Have I said a bad word yet? Because maybe that would eliminate my channel from there. Anyway, so I don't know. Okay, so that's the books, 10 books, and I'm not going to make any promises as to when I'm going to get another video up, because work has been nuts. If I thought I'd worked hard before, well, there's nothing to that now. I leave for work before 7 in the morning, and I get home some nights after 9 in the evening, and that's going to happen again tomorrow. Yay! And currently I've been booked off with stress, actually. I thought there was issues with my heart, because my heart was doing weird shit in the end. There we go, I said a bad word. It's not a children's channel. And yeah, so I don't know. I've got to, you know, my New Year's resolution was balance. I need to find time for myself, time for reading, time to actually do this. I mean, it's not a lot to ask, you know, half an hour to go make a video once a week. It's really not bunking work. It's not being negligent, but I need to find the time to do this stuff again. And I know everybody says to me, you just got to learn how to say no. Yeah, no. I can say no when it comes to that. I'm very bad at saying no to my boss, who looks at me with such pride and joy and appreciation, and then go, no. So, I don't know. There we go, no again. But something's going to have to happen, because I am far too young to go off to the doctor thinking that I'm going to get stuck on all the heart meds that my dad was on. But anyway, so yeah, long story short there. But the point of all of this, which you really didn't need to know, is that I'm not going to make promises. This is relaxing, this is fun, and I still want to be a part of YouTube, or BookTube, bugger YouTube. I just want to be a part of BookTube, and I want to be a part of the conversation, and I would like to have the fun of doing all of that without all the stress of I need to get a video out. And I mean, you guys are great. You're hanging on, and well, you're hanging around and you're waiting, and I don't know how I'm getting new subscribers still, because honestly, you know, you guys are amazing and optimistic, and thank you if anybody mentioned me and that's how I happened, because that happens in little spurts, and I'm just really grateful, and I love this community, and I don't want to give it up. So that's the long and short of it, and everything else. And I am now going to go and put all these books back on my shelf without knocking myself out, because they're big and they're huge and they're right at the top. Anyway, see you around. Happy reading. Bye for now.